neuroscience, quantum physics, biology, plant medicine, non-dual tantric meditative practices. We will be exploring these concepts with experts to provide insight. Get ready to melt reality with us.
AZA Allsop is an artist, neuroscientist, and psychiatrist who conducts research at the intersection of social cognition, music mindfulness, and psychedelics. His research and clinical work is guided by the belief that decoding these tools will provide a better understanding of how social groups function and offer insights into treating mental suffering and enhancing the evolution of society at large. AZA received his MD from Harvard Medical School, his PhD in neuroscience from MIT, and was an Emerson Scholar at Berklee College of Music. He completed his residency in the Department of Psychiatry at Yale University. AZA is currently an assistant professor in Yale's Department of Psychiatry and director of the Center for Collective Healing at Howard University. In addition to his academic achievements, AZA also teaches meditation, yoga, and music, and co-founded Renaissance Entertainment and Me Freely, companies that combine music, science, and community building, to promote socio-cultural evolution.
Welcome, AZA. It's so wonderful to have you here and to just dive in together. You have such a rich and diverse background fusing music and social neuroscience into a deeper understanding of the biases and social structures that separate our connected humanity in deeper ways. Was there a moment when you were younger that inspired you to dive into the social cultural evolution?
Yeah, I can't really, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be able to speak with you all. And I really can't put it down to one moment, but I think a lot of little moments. Being someone who, is a first generation American, and in the process of, my family kind of looking to become established in this new space, moving a lot of different places and living in a few different states, across the East Coast, and always having a more global view. It became clear to me that people in different places saw things in different ways and had different experiences. Also growing up in a religious background and a religious culture, it was clear to me that people also found different paths towards making meaning of their own lives and the relationship they had with each other. And I was always curious about how among those differences we could find connectedness. And as I grew and began to learn more, it became, I think, just more important to understand this as the challenges that we face now as humans really are existential and really threaten our very survival. And so I think these questions became more and more important and more at the center of my mind. I think that's part of why I went into social neuroscience, for my PhD. It's like these questions were becoming more and more at the forefront, and I really wanted to dive in to try to get a better understanding.
So let's get into your work and interest in bias. Mm-hmm. Can you share some details about your work as a psychiatrist as it relates to social groups, to bias, and the deconstruction of how bias impacts cognition and behavior?
Yeah, I think we all sort of have our own little world that we live in, and the synthesis of our different experiences, our different conditionings really shape how we see the world. And so understanding that plays a part in our in the ways that we relate to each other and in the ways that we think about solving problems. And it particularly, has a role to play in how we think about the groups that we are part of, what's an in-group and what's an out-group. A lot of that is shaped by the conditioning and the perspectives and experiences that we've had through our development. And so better understanding how we come to be adults and have these very entrenched views of ourselves, our identities and others and their identities, and what that means for our ability to relate to each other, how different social structures can then leverage that to create more depolarization, which then allows power to be entrenched in certain ways and moved in certain ways, I think become really important. And that shows up in how we think about race. It shows up how we think about gender. It shows out about how we think about ethnicity. I mean, there are just all these different ways that this is playing a big part in our inability to solve some of our coordination challenges. And so thinking about not only how is this happening in the brain, right? What are the features and structures and computations, representations in the brain that shape these biases, whether it's social or otherwise? And then what are the ways and what are the tools that we can use to begin to deconstruct those to allow us to be creative in finding new ways to relate to each other, I think is a very critical question for us right now.
So, of course, I have unconscious biases. I think we all do. I try to, of course, understand myself in that way. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how do we help ourselves through cultural messaging, social messaging, parental messaging, unconscious behaviors that we have, so that we could be kinder people in the world?
Yeah, I mean, so I think unconscious biases are simply deeply embedded beliefs that we've gained throughout our conditioning that may have never been questioned, that still shape in an implicit way the ways in which we act and enact with each other. And the most powerful thing really that we can do about that is to shed light on it, make them conscious. It's simple, but it's challenging to do. And often there's a lot of emotional attachment to what we've thought of as our identity and what we've thought of as that identity in relation to others. And to really shed light on that and to begin to confront those unconscious beliefs can sometimes be painful and really challenging. And so, but becomes necessary if we want to be able to then move past it, because as long as they are unconscious, then they are able to kind of hold a certain power in shaping our behavioral structure. And when we make them conscious, we can begin to inject a space that gives us new options for how we behave. And most of these biases, again, are really inherited. We are taught them through society, through the experiences that we have, things that are sometimes explicitly said, but mostly observed and implicitly learned. And they come to be, by the time we're adults, very entrenched, even though we've probably never consciously thought it, or and in some cases might even have a lot of resistance to thinking that might be a part of our belief structure. And it shows up again in a lot of different ways. Race is one of them. Sex and gender is another. Sexuality is another. But it shows up in a lot of different ways.
Look, I want to say something. I work in venture, in funding, in capital. And of course, women see less than 3%, and Black and brown women see less than 1%. And, there's studies that white men from Harvard, from Yale, from some of these elite schools control about 73% of venture in this country. And it's that bias of funding a person that looks like you, funding, there's more confidence somehow in funding someone that looks like them. And so they stay in their groups, in their communities. And we can show that actually by diversifying the C-suite, the GPs in the fund, or the leaders in a company, that there's more alpha, actually, because there's more diverse points of view.
Yeah.
And so it's a really challenging issue because so little capital is moving out in the world because of unconscious bias.
Yeah, and look, I went to Harvard for med school. I went to MIT for grad school. I went to Yale for residency, and I understand that tendency to begin to really embed that belief that, oh, if I'm at this certain institution, that means I'm actually smarter than everyone else, or actually I'm the only one with good ideas, right? But of course, that's not true. And so when we look at those sorts of statistics, I think a critical thinker has to ask, well, is it the case that all of the great ideas, 70% of the great ideas in the world, really belong to white men at Harvard, Yale, Stanford? right? Or is it that there's some other forces at play that are shaping why the capital is being cycled within this certain community or within this certain culture?
Exactly.
So let's try to focus in a little bit on group dynamics. So of course, Freud used the term mob mentality to describe how group people behave differently in groups than they do individually. Can you talk a little bit about these group dynamics versus individual behavior as they relate to bias?
Yeah, I mean, so in our evolutionary history, becoming and being a part of a social structure was basically the same as one's ability to survive. If I was an outcast, if I wasn't a part of the social group, my ability to survive was definitely in jeopardy. And so, as a part of that evolutionary history, the brain has evolved um, a certain set of computations and networks that are really caring about not only registering my position within the group, but making sure that as I begin to get signals that tell me I'm outside of the group, I find motivation to adjust my behavior so that I can be within the group again. Right. And so just at a very biological and basic level, there are these features at play that are driving our behavior. Um, and I think as we now come to today's society, we see the degree of depolarization where it's black versus white, Israeli versus Palestine, Democrat versus Republican. There's this extreme amount of polarization, and it leads to these echo chambers and bubbles where everyone is looking for the signals that validate them as a part of that group, and anything that challenges that is seen as other, and not just other, but the other that needs to be destroyed, right? And so I think these group dynamics and one's ability to think critically or think independently within a group is something that has become less and less maybe rewarded. Um, and at this time, particularly, it's really important for us to begin to think about how do we build bridges between groups that are polarized? How do we engage in processes of depolarization so that we're able to actually collectively construct solutions to a myriad of problems, right? Whether that be the problems that exist within our social structures, whether that be problems that exist within our relationship to the earth and climate crisis and climate action. These are all things that are going to require us to really be able to coordinate and become depolarized in a sense. And so group dynamics are certainly shaping individuals' behavior. And within the group, individuals are less likely now to challenge the group because they want to be a part of the group. There is a sense of safety within that group, and that is a part of our evolutionary history.
Yeah, and I always think about what is the bridge that connects two, warring two two groups that are different. Like what are the things that they do agree upon? What are the things that connect us? And I know that you work with that you founded Brain Bias Being.
Yeah.
This coming in, and what is your what are you doing there with your research, and what are you hoping for in the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, Brain Bias and Being was really founded with my partner Bruce Barron out of a recognition that we started really working with academic departments, but also I've worked with other kinds of organizations. People were really having challenges having these conversations, and we really wanted to create a space where we could facilitate an open discussion about the social dynamics that were happening within the workplace, especially as it related to things like race and gender and sex and sexuality. And we, the idea of brain bias and being was really, we start the conversation looking at the brain, right? What is happening within the social brain, which we kind of talked about a little bit already, but the brain has evolved to really represent information and compute information in a certain way that leads us to these ways of being that might be unconscious, and leads to these behaviors that might be unconscious. So how can we first understand that, hey, we have these brains, this is how they've evolved, this is how they work, and we have to first deal with that reality if we want to really get at the problem. Then we think about bias. So how is it that the brains that we have and the conditioning that those brains have come and developed under have led to the certain biases that we have? And do we have the bravery to confront those and talk about those, within the space with each other? And do we have the bravery to want to do something about that and face the challenge of doing something about that? And then being this idea that there is this core that we all share, this core of being, our core nature as humans, our ability to be aware and to feel and to exist is something that unites us. We all have a certain degree of pain and we all can suffer in these certain ways. We all do want love. We all do want um, to belong, and to be able to create and to really be fulfilled, right? And so how do we get ourselves to that place of being? And one of the things we use as a part of that is music and open mic sharing and really taking communities and helping facilitate spaces in which they can be creative and share these other aspects of themselves. And maybe through that aspect of just being with each other, we find ways to get the bravery to face the biases and understand these brains that we have. And so we've now been doing that work for a few years in a lot of different circles and spaces, and really helping communities um to face these challenges in a way that's open. Many times people have never had these conversations with each other. They've never talked about this with each other. And so being able to facilitate a space where that can happen, we think is really really important.
That's that's a really great segue to something I wanted to ask you about. Some people have been talking about and writing about this concept that they call a crisis among young men, mostly in the United States, I think. And they describe this clearly as a crisis that's happening alongside the bias toward people of color and women that we're seeing, in boardrooms in the medical communities, as we've been talking about. But they cite a lot of statistics suggesting that young men are struggling in the workplace as well as physically and emotionally. What are your thoughts related to bias as it can apply to groups like this, beyond sort of those groups that are traditionally identified as suffering from bias in society?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a very long time, we have really elevated this idea of uh the patriarchy, and this certain value set that is supposed to make a man, a man. And a lot of that has to do with this idea of being tough, not showing emotion, um, being a certain type of go-getter. Violence in some ways has become a value within that view. And so I think in some ways these ideas have been, over time eroding away at men's ability to be in touch with their emotions and be in touch with the ways in which they carry stress, and even the idea that one shouldn't have a space to be able to talk about one's feelings. If one is really a man, you should just toughen it up and go out there and do more work and get the job done. And this sort of idea, I think, has really begun to erode men's ability to actually have balance.
Yeah.
And so I think this is now kind of this fruit is now coming to bear in a certain way, in which you have a generation of men who are completely out of touch with their emotions, and with their heart, and who really have put a lot more into career development in a certain way, or this idea of their value being really specifically tied to the amount of money that they can have, right? And we also just talked about a lot of the capital really isn't equitably shared amongst all men, right? And so a lot of men have real challenges with their identity and with their value. And I mean, we see this in sort of suicide completions and things of that nature. And so I think it's a call really for us to restore balance, and really teaching boys how to be in touch with their emotions in a certain way, and to be able to act with both the heart and the head, and having that unity and communion between the two, instead of everything being intellectualized, and what's happening in the heart and the emotions being sort of devalued.
So great. I know Jennifer Newsom's, Gavin Newsom's wife, Governor Gavin Newsom's wife, did a film called The Masks. I think it's called The Masks He Wears. But it's an incredible documentary that follows boys in schools, and the teacher has them, gives them a mask, and they write on the inside of the mask what they really feel, and on the outside of the mask what they show. And of course, all of the inside was, I feel scared, I feel insecure, I have self-loathing, and all the outside was, I'm a badass. And it's a really fascinating film to watch. And so does this work, does the kind of work you're doing, are you also addressing this work at the Center for Healing at Howard? And what's your focus there, and your goals of working there?
Yeah, so the Center for Collective Healing is really a project I'm very excited about. And this is a research center that is birthed out of the Energia Foundation, the first hubs being at Howard and at Yale. And the idea is that we want to focus on really this idea of depolarization, and how do we help come up with a scientific approach to facing coordination challenges. And so we look at social and racial stress and ways in which we can better understand that and intervene within that. We look at couples and family therapy and ways that we can, again, use the couple, use the family as a entryway to healing the broader community. All of this is our approach for all of this is really group-based treatments and community-based treatments. We also look at climate crisis and nature relatedness, and thinking about ways that we can spur climate action. And then lastly, multimodal languages. So things like music, dance, theater, art. How can these be brought into the group therapeutic framework and setting to address those other three areas that I mentioned? And so, yeah, we're excited to start this work at Howard, and obviously psychedelics will be a part of that approach, but not the only tool sort of in the toolkit. But we do view that as one powerful tool that can really be used in this sort of path towards really collective forms of treatment and community-based forms of therapy. And really see kind of, yeah, this idea that we can then use this as a way to foster depolarization and help us solve these coordination challenges is something that, we're really excited about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I met you at a psychedelic investors gathering, and one of the things I can say about psychedelics is that the subject object experience, that I'm separate than all of life, is softened. It melts a little, and so through that experience, one has a more expanded or connected experience with nature and with other people, where their guard drops down. And so there's a lot of healing through post-traumatic stress issues and things like that. And I'm so fascinated and so excited about the psychedelic movement and the studies that are being done with MDMA and everything to do exactly what you're describing, which is to enable a person to sit in their own wonder and realize that we are all connected profoundly to each other.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think when we think about this idea of how do we experience, because I think there's the intellectual idea of, we're all connected, and then there's the experiential realization of that. And those things, I think, can motivate behavior in a very different way. And I think helping people to kind of experience this connectedness that we share, not just with each other, but with our planet, with Earth, can potentially spur the type of motivation that we will need to make really drastic changes that, more and more I'm convinced are going to be needed for our survival.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. There's an effect with psychedelics on the ego. And one of the questions that we ask in this work is how would you as a psychiatrist, how would you describe the ego, and how do you think that the ego impacts unconscious bias, and how can medicines and treatments with psychedelics sort of revolutionize our own experience with the ego and our understanding of ourselves as either separate beings or indivisible beings.
Yeah. This is something that I think about a lot and have even had to think about recently in my own life, as I think the ego can be this very pernicious force that is always looking sort of to tell a story, and I view it as sort of the organizing principle for our experiences, and that seeks to contextualize and tell a story about who we are and provide meaning for the things that are happening to us. The problem or the challenge with the ego is that it's a very limited organizing structure, and it only has a limited set of information. And so, but it wants to tell the whole story, even though it only has this amount of the information, right? And so the more that we are able to observe the ego and understand that it is not actually ourselves, but it is sort of secondary to our true selves, and the more that we can observe that and begin to have that separation, I think it gives us, again, that this sort of space and freedom and creativity to decide, what do we do with this, right? Because I think it can be helpful, right? It's helpful to have memory. It's helpful to be able to make meaning in a certain way. It's helpful to have an organized psyche, right? And we can see, I see people who don't have an organized psyche, and they run into a lot of challenges in terms of their ability to fit into societal structure and lead a certain type of life within our social structure, right? So I don't always want to demonize the ego, but I think the issue is when the ego becomes us and runs the show in a certain way. We can very quickly run into challenges. And so I think psychedelics, but things like mindfulness, music, there are lots of tools that we can use to begin to develop a more right relationship with the ego, be able to observe the ego and understand sort of the role that it plays, and keep it within its realm and within its role, and not let it rule us in a sense.
Yeah, I always say that the ego is a tool, right? The mind, intellect, and ego, and they're really important. But instead of them running us, it's great to gain some mastery over them or understanding.
So that's a great opening for us to talk about what an incredible background you have in music, AZA. So you were awarded MIT's Emerson Scholarship to study at Berklee College of Music, and you now run Renaissance Entertainment, and you've released multiple pieces of original music. So can you share with us a little bit on how music informs your work as a psychiatrist, as a healer, as a scientist?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really incredible journey, because I think in my relationship to music starts in the church. So I think I always had a very spiritual understanding of music, and this idea that certain vibrations, certain patterns of vibration can really move people in a certain way, can allow people access to different parts of themselves, and provide a certain sort of catharsis. And I've always had a very visceral relationship to music. And so as I grew older and began to study music more in other contexts, I always felt as though these things had to be separate. Like my work as a physician and a scientist had to be separate from my work as an artist, because you can't be a serious physician and scientist if you're also a serious musician, or vice versa. And so it's been a real, I think, blessing for me to have these things begin to converge, and now really be converged in in a certain way, where I'm able to use science to study music and bring music also into my science and into healing. It's, the brain operates under the language of frequency. And music is frequency, it's vibration. And so I think even at the very fundamental level, there's some really unique ways and some unique access that music can have into our nervous system, that I think can be very powerful. And I've seen used in very powerful ways within one's healing and recovery process. I think this ability for us to create sound, and even this idea that sound is sort of one of the first, from a cosmic perspective, sound is one of the first creative acts. I think is this a really powerful idea, that there is really something really special with our ability to create sound and to manipulate sound, to be able to heal. And so for me, personally, as an artist, I think beginning to really understand the power of music has shaped the way that I approach my art, as an artist, but has also been really rewarding to be able to now kind of build the kind of, because I don't think anything, this is not new. I think, humans in our ancient history understood this in a very powerful way, in ways that we probably today still are grasping at. But to be able to build evidence within sort of the Western scientific context for the ability of things like music and drumming, to help people in their healing processes, I think has been really rewarding for me.
Wow, so exciting. And we're so excited that you're going to share a little piece. We're just going to play a little piece of your music here, just to give our listeners a taste. And then we'll come back in a moment.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us, AZA. That was beautiful. Let's talk a little bit about divisiveness in the world. There are wars across the globe, and we have a political environment here in the United States that really couldn't be more divisive. What are your thoughts to help our listeners navigate this terrain? So in a world where there's so much divisiveness, do you have any thoughts on a way to have a productive path forward?
Yeah, it can be very disheartening and discouraging. I mean, I think a lot of times I have to almost stay away from the news, because, just seeing the ways in which, again, this idea of polarization, and if you can polarize the people, the people then don't have power, right? Because the power only comes in our ability to be united around certain ideas. And so seeing this play out can be really disheartening. I think there's always light. There's always light in the darkness. And I think the more that we can focus on, there are people that want unity. There are people that want to have the conversation and want to build bridges. And can we be courageous to focus on the possibilities there? I was watching this news broadcast where they were talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and within the pain and suffering there's still people in both camps that are very actively now working to have those conversations with each other and figure out ways to build bridges. And it's small in certain ways, but those are the seeds that are generative and that build into real solutions. And so I think within all of the things that are happening, even within our own country, and I think some of the political divisiveness and real violence even that is erupting around this, there are still people who want to see things be different, and who understand the gravity of the situation that we're in, and that we can't continue to play politics in the way that we have if we want to if we want to see this country continue to stand, actually, and if we want to, as a country, help lead the world into a sustainable future, we will have to fix some things here first about the ways that we even, operate our own governance. And so I think those people are here. I think even the fact that we're having this conversation, right? I think these are the seeds of light that we can water with our attention and with our effort, with our energy, and pray that with that effort, these things begin to grow. And I think for me, it's not necessarily comforting. However, I think certain sorts of systems that are built on inequity, that are built on violence, that are built on misuses of power never stand. That's just historically true. They never stand forever. And so I think understanding that the systems that we have, if they don't evolve, if they don't become more able to actually sustain the kinds of action and effort that are needed for our survival, that they will eventually fail. And that's just the way that things have always gone, and these cycles operate within our humanity. And I think we want to be on the right side of history. We want to be on the right sides of those cycles, and helping to usher in sort of the next iteration of what our society looks like and what humanity looks like.
What freedom looks like,
Yeah.
what equity looks like, where all boats rise and there's equity for everyone. And, it's idealistic, but I think we continue, historically, to push this idea forward of what does it look like to have an equitable world where there's food for everyone and water and things like that. And I think that a lot of the climate movement, a lot of the social justice movement continue to push back on oligarchs and dictators and things like that. And so we just have to continue the good fight. And so I was wondering then, how can our listeners support your work? And even if it's in their own drumming circles, or if it's things that they can do to support what you're doing, what's the next thing for you, and how can our listeners be involved in their own life or with your work?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think in the most broad way possible, I think continuing to support these sorts of conversation, these sorts of ideas, and finding ways within their own communities to build these bridges and not get so entrenched in the the political dialogue or these other sorts of divisive machinations, that they lose sight of our real ability to build a more idealistic society, right? And it happens in iterations. I think when we look at the American experiment and the things that we've been able to accomplish here, there are things we've done that hadn't been done before. There are things that moved us closer to an ideal that we hadn't gotten as close to before in certain ways. And, there's a lot that goes into that. It's a very complex situation, but I think there are real things that we've accomplished that hadn't been accomplished before. We just are at a point where we need to now think, creatively about what the next thing looks like. Clearly, what we're doing isn't working. In some other ways, I think, getting into contact and seeing if there's work that's happening at the center or through any of the companies or movements that we've talked about that might be able to provide, space for your community or facilitate, certain, events for your community. Obviously, you can support the work that's happening at the center, either financially or through offering, space for research. So I think there's lots of different ways to support, and I encourage people to contact, myself or my team to think about ways that we might be able to support them and they might be able to support us.
What an inspiring and uplifting conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. To learn more about all of AZA's projects, the Center for Collective Healing, Brain Bias Being, and to listen to some of AZA's amazing music, you can visit our show notes and we'll have links to everything. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
Yeah.
you, AZA. Wonderful, wonderful conversation.
No, I really enjoyed it. Thank you all for having me and for the platform to be able to speak on, I think, these really, really important ideas.
This week, I'm going to discuss a study entitled Psychedelics for Patients with Cancer, a comprehensive literature review. Not surprisingly, cancer patients have a high incidence of depression and anxiety. The objective of this study was to assess whether psychedelics are effective in treating anxiety or depression among patients with cancer. In a literature review of this type, the investigators carefully searched the National Library of Medicine PubMed database and look for randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. All studies identified showed that patients who received psychedelics had significant reductions in anxiety and depression scores, and clinically relevant reductions occurred much more commonly in psychedelic-treated patients than those given placebo. The results of this literature review suggest that psychedelics may offer a new potential option for treating cancer patients who suffer from anxiety and depression, especially since many scientists believe that traditional antidepressants can be associated with adverse events and some patient populations have limited responsiveness. Because the studies were all well-designed, double-blind clinical trials, we can have some degree of confidence that the findings were not due to some sort of bias. The unique mechanism of action of psychedelics offers new promise for patients who are not being sufficiently treated with current anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications. The study was performed in the Department of Pharmacy at the University of Connecticut. For a link to the study, see our show notes.
Hi, this practice is called home base. So I'd like for you to close your eyes and come right inside into that very familiar place that you've known when you were 2 or 3 and 5 and 7 and 12, as a young adult, as an adult. Just come right inside and feel yourself in your very private, intimate space. No one else can go here. This is yours. If you need a private room, this is it. And I want you just to begin to relax your eyes, let your eyes drop back in their socket a little, let your jaw drop and your mouth. Wiggle your jaw and let your tongue fall back a little. Let your shoulders drop in your throat, your arms relax, fingers. Just watch as your lungs and your heart begin to slow down. You can even take a little breath here, breathing in. And just relax. Take another breath. And relax. Let your belly drop. Let the muscles in your hips and legs, shins, your feet, let it all become limp. And with your awareness, come back up. I want you just to begin to observe your breath moving in and out. What I love about this process is that from a wild spinning mind and sometimes a negative thinking mind, what do you have to do? The past, the future, all of these thoughts enlivened. Following your breath brings your awareness to one thing. One thing. This is called ekagrata, one-pointedness of mind. So sit here as your mind follows your breath up and down. My friend Denise calls this a sterling silver thread of awareness. Just follow it, super subtle. You're not forcing your breath. It's actually a short journey up and a rather short journey down, maybe a little bit longer. Don't control your breath, just observe. How nice does this feel, right? You're bathed in a focus. You're bathed in one pointed awareness. You're resting. When you feel ready, as you observe your breath going in and out, just want you to make a gentle pause at the bottom, an awareness at the bottom that your breath is at the end of the bottom before it moves into the inhalation. So at that turning point at the bottom, before you inhale, just observe. You're doing nothing. You're observing the whole time as the breath goes up and then down and then pauses. Then up and then down. And there's a gentle, quiet pause. Continue. I want you to feel like this is home base. That you can come here during your day and rest while being in life, in a classroom, in a stressful office, following the path of your breath up and down. And the pause at the bottom is like your cushy chair, pillows. It's a resting place. You can do this when you're walking. Just follow your breath from one place to another. You can do this standing in line. You can practice for 5 or 10 minutes before going to work or school and when you get home. This will calm down your entire nervous system and your thoughts and your heartbeat. From fight or flight, you will be in calmness. Here you have no past or future. You're just observing one movement of breath up and down. As we come out of this meditation, which is really the most powerful meditation of a tradition that I'll tell you about, I want you to begin to wiggle your feet and your toes a bit. Just let your mind relax now and take a regular breath in. Just begin to come out of this meditation. I'm sure you feel quiet now. Just open your eyes. You are perfect here. You lack nothing. You are an exquisite creation. Regardless of whether you have money struggles or relationship struggles or job struggles, this is where you're whole in this place. You lack nothing. So thank you very much for being with me today. We will do more meditations and come home here whenever you feel anxiety or stress. It'll make a world of difference. The music you have been listening to is actually my consciousness in motion. To create this hypnotic music, Marsha Britskaya of Nextvox and her team connected musical notes to the frequency of my brainwaves from gamma to delta. The team at Nextvox will be exploring how listening to your own brainwaves can provide health benefits from reducing your blood pressure to calming anxiety. Visit our show notes to learn more about Nextvox.
Exploring Reality Maybe is written, produced, fact-checked, and edited by Jody R. Weiss and David Schwartz. Research support is provided by Semicolon Connects. Music produced by Nextvox. Visit our website at exploringrealitymaybe.org to find show notes, transcripts, bios, and to learn more. If you like the show, please visit our website to donate.